Foundations for Success, the Project Management Essentials. When we think about project management, we don't often think about the internal state as we try to manage this project. And so to start talking about project management essentials, we have to actually begin with what's going on inside of us, as well as what's going on around us. When we think about what's going on around us, we're talking about the time and the tasks. How much time do we have? What do we have to do? And that's important. But we also have to focus on what's going on inside of us and the thoughts and the beliefs that we have about these tasks and about ourselves, because that actually is a greater instigator of procrastination than the actual tasks and the time that we have. What we need to do is we need to find a way to make consistent progress on our long-range projects, rather than relying on the intensity or the stress of the deadline to get done these projects. And so when we think about the internal and external state, what we're really talking about is we're talking about this state of flow. And flow was discovered by a psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi. He wrote a book called Flow. And really what he found was that flow is this space, this workflow where time stands still and we find great enjoyment in the task. The problem is that sometimes flow begins to move toward a state of anxiety, and anxiety occurs when the challenge of the task is greater than the skill or the belief we have. We become very anxious and we can't work as productively. However, there's sometimes in these state of flow on the other side where if the skill is greater than the challenge, we become bored and time seems to slow down on that side. So the state of flow is dynamic, that as we increase in skills, we actually will have to increase the challenge, lest we go to boredom. But if we grab too great of a challenge, then we move into the anxiety. So as we grow as students, the flow state will change as well. And so really what flow is, it's the matching of the challenge of the task with the skill or the belief that we have. And so if we're just starting out, we need to find challenges that match our skill. But as we progress in our education, we need to take on greater challenges to find that flow state. The benefits of flow is that we become much more productive when we can match the internal and the external. So when we think about the internal, what we're talking about is the skills, whether that's reading or technology or working with others. That also refers to our beliefs, which drive our behaviors, and our habits, the things that we do without thinking. At the same time, life happens as we're trying to build these skills. So whether the challenge comes from within the course or something outside of our courses, whether it's the priorities that are competing, whether that's family or ministry, as well as the upcoming deadlines. These are all things that are coming at us from outside of who we are. And so to manage those two, the internal, the belief, the skills, and the external, that's where we're going to find our flow state. So the question I have for you as we think about the internal and external, just do a self-check. Where is your greatest challenge? Are they the internals? Or the belief that you belong here, that you can get the job done? Or is it managing the external, the priorities of life? If it happens to be the external, then we need to talk about how much time do you have for this education? And what kind of tasks do you have that match your time? In the global environment, the online course environment is set up in an 8-week course. And so each week, you can expect that about 17 hours of work will be expected of you, plus an hour of Zoom with your professor. And Wednesdays and Saturdays tend to be the days that something is due. And so if you know that, you can begin to match the time and the tasks so that you can begin to move forward on these projects. If you're taking classes on a campus, then you can expect to have 2 hours in class with your professors and classmates. If you're in a graduate program, a residency week may end up looking like you have most of your time is devoted toward in-class experiences for that residency week. And lastly, on the last week of the class, you can expect to have less assignments due, so 9 hours worth of work, or those class times and Zoom time. So the final week kind of slows down a little bit for us. And so knowing that, what we can do is we can begin to map where our time goes, not just at the academic level, but also in your other life priorities, whether you're involved in ministry, with family, with work. Blocking off consistent times that you can devote toward these projects are going to help you manage the time, the external aspects of project management. And so by blocking off those times, you can create space for these weekly recurring tasks or this creative deep work. And so labeling where your time is going is a great way to see how much time you have for these tasks. And so when we think about tasks, one of the main ways that we know what tasks are coming up is through the course syllabi. Yes, Canvas can show you what's due this week, but when we think about long-term project management, we need to have a bird's eye view of the course to be able to match our time as well as our tasks. And so syllabi are available 10 days before things begin to kick off in your course. And that's where you can add some of those weekly assignments, whether that's reading or discussion board posts or reading responses. You can begin to put those into a consistent study block in your ideal week, freeing up some of those larger time blocks for some of your deep creative work. If you need help breaking down a long-range assignment, so let's say you look at your syllabus and you have a paper that's due on week 7. A great tool is on the Minnesota University Library Assignment Calculator. If you Google that, you come to this page here in which you can put your current start date, so for example, June 13th, and then you can put when the due date is. And it will calculate, it will break the long-range assignment down into manageable steps. And that's key. Because if we look at the project as one large project, sometimes we avoid starting the assignment early. And so just like building a wall, we build it brick by brick. How do you complete a course? How do you complete an assignment? You complete it one small step at a time. So the University of Minnesota has a library assignment calculator that can be very helpful in helping you break down these long-range assignments into manageable pieces. And finally, having a simple calendar would allow you to put your own deadlines in that fits with your life calendar, with your work calendar, with your ministry calendar, because the due date of the assignment is not the do it date. Beginning to move things toward your own deadlines will allow you to take more ownership of these long-range assignments. And so when we think about the internal and the external, and then specifically about the external, how do we break the external, the challenges, down into meaningful chunks so that I can find that flow state? A question that we need to ask is, does your weekly schedule have consistent small time blocks for your priorities, whether that's family, ministry, for the tasks, and the creative work that you have? So we've talked about the external, but let's talk about the internal, because all of us have been there. We create the plan. We tell ourselves that we're going to start today. And then the day arrives and we're not quite ready to begin, whether that's because we haven't had things scheduled out or because we don't have the motivation today to start. And we think, you know what? I'm going to set my alarm for tomorrow morning. I'm going to get up early before work, and I'm really going to do that assignment now. And so we overcompensate. Maybe we even start super early, and we end up saying, well, I'm not exactly rested yet, so I need to maybe do that after work. And so this afternoon, that's when I'm going to get started. And we keep revising this plan over and over again. That's procrastination. We're all procrastinators. What we need to figure out is, how can we actually take the action on these plans? And so to do that, we need to begin to look at what Nick Vogue says is the main root of procrastination. And this quote seems counterintuitive, but Nick says that procrastination is actually a self-preservation strategy for helping us deal with conflicting motivations. So this idea, I want to pause here and think about, how is procrastination actually the perfect strategy for self-preservation? That may seem counterintuitive, but let's see if we can piece this out. Many of us who are procrastinators, and I would say the majority of students are, somehow end up with this belief system in their head. And it takes the form of an equation. And this is from Vogue's TED Talk called Self-Worth Theory, the Key to Understanding and Overcoming Procrastination. I'd highly recommend it. In this equation that students somehow come up with is that my performance on this project, meaning my grade, my professor's feedback, somehow is linked to and reveals my ability. And that ability then shows my self-worth, my identity, how I feel about myself. And for many of us, that leads us into this procrastination loop. Let me explain. If we believe that our performance is somehow directly linked over to our self-worth, what ends up happening is we end up not wanting to take action on that project. Even if we have the perfect plan, let's say we have the ideal week, we've looked at the syllabi, we've broken things down into small steps. By starting this assignment, we are putting our self-worth on the table, that if we get bad feedback or a bad grade, that's going to somehow directly reveal to us and to others how much we're worth. So what we do is we end up sabotaging and disconnecting performance and ability rather than ability and self-worth. So that if I fail, or if I don't do as good as I wanted to, if I don't get that A, what I can say to myself or others is, well, I didn't have the time to do that. I just started this last night. We're preserving our concept of ourself. But we also get a bonus, and Nick Vogue says this, that if we're able to somehow get the A, when we know that our performance was not up to what it could have been, then we actually get a double boost of our self-worth, that, wow, I must be really smart, because I just got an A and I only spent 2 hours on that assignment when I know I should have spent 6. And so it keeps us in this cycle of protecting ourselves. We never want to put our self-worth out there, so we actually unhook our performance and our ability. The answer is, when we do have an assignment, to be able to beat procrastination, we have to acknowledge that the grade, the feedback, is not a reflection of who we are as a person, or our worth as a person, or our worth as a student, or somehow our future is in jeopardy. That feedback and criticism is actually a natural part of the learning experience. And so when we feel those moments of, I don't know what I'm doing, everyone else does, but I don't, or I think if I ask this question, it would appear that I may not have the same level of ability as my classmates. What really is happening is we're believing the lie that our ability is somehow equivalent to our self-worth. And taking on that role of a learner, that humility there, will allow us to begin to take action even when our internal state is telling us to stop and preserve who we are. And so when we need to take action, a way to change our mindset is to view these challenges as an opportunity to grow, not as a confirmation of our ability. That professor's feedback is actually the route to improvement. To be able to say, yet, I'm not good at writing yet. By adding that word to the end of a sentence, it shows that we're not confirming our ability or confirming our self-worth. We're just allowing ourselves the room to grow. And sometimes when we come to a large project, a 6-page paper, or a thesis or a dissertation, the first thought in our head is, can I do this? Do I have what it takes? But if we can remain curious and come into problem-solving mode with a question, how can I do this? We begin to look for strategies rather than beginning to procrastinate and to avoid. And lastly, you don't attach your self-worth to a grade. You have value, you belong here at LBC, regardless if the grade says so. Finding those strategies to adapt is more important than confirming your ability. And so that question here is a little chance for self-reflection. Are there types of assignments that professors give that endanger your self-worth? Is there something that when you see this type of assignment, alarm bells go off in your head? And probably more importantly, what do you do in those moments? Do you step forward and ask for help? Do you pull back and avoid until it becomes too late and the stress of the deadline is the thing that takes over? The fear of failure actually wins out rather than the desire to improve? So knowing what you do in these moments when the assignments come, that's checking in with your internal world. Remember, we're trying to get to that flow state, be able to balance the external challenges of life and the internal belief and skills that we have. And as we grow our skills and belief, we can then take on more challenges. And so finally, to take action, we need to prioritize consistency over intensity. I love this quote by Dale Carnegie. Inaction, or sometimes we could say just thinking about it, perseverating on it, breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. And if you want to conquer that fear, do not sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy. So going out and getting busy looks like consistency. And James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, really lays this out clearly. That if we get better by 1% every day, by the end of a year, our graph is going to look like the top graph, 37% better, he says. And if we get 1% worse every day, if we avoid conflict, if we avoid the hard things, we're going to get worse. And he says this in his blog, most people need consistency more than they need intensity. But they think that intensity is going to be the thing. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to write a full paper tonight. It's due tonight. I have to write the paper tonight. I'm going to go for a weekend prayer retreat. This big intense experience. What they really should be thinking about is consistency. You know, I want to be the type of person that doesn't miss a workout. Or I'm going to be the type of student that spends a little bit of time each day writing. I'm going to spend a little time in prayer, a little time in scripture reading. What we get sucked in is thinking that the intensity is the thing that makes a good story. It might be the social media post. It might be the story that you can tell your family. But it's actually the consistency that makes the progress. So what's the problem with intensity? The problem is that intensity relies on motivation or emotion. And emotion, stress, or great feelings, those aren't reliable when it comes to long-range projects or even building habits. That if you're only waiting for when you feel like it or when you believe you can do something, there's going to be times of peaks and valleys. And so if you set a bar very high in the early stages as a student, as an athlete, in your work life, there'll be times where those habits fall off. So by setting easy, consistent habits that rely more on consistency than on intensity, you're actually going to be able to hit that 37% better by the end of your year rather than relying on, I'll write the paper when I feel like it. So finding ways to reorient how you work on long-range projects, not in the motivation or not in the stress of a deadline, but rather in the consistent small wins every day. And so we set goals we need to be setting goals that are what James Clear calls the zone of long-term growth. Because if the goals are too easy, going back to that flow state, we become lazy, bored. And for many of you, that might not be where you're at. You might be in the B side, the burnout side, where you're having to give maximal effort on every weekend to get your assignments in on time. Or maybe you neglect your assignments for the first 2 weeks because of other priorities, leaving you having to play catch up in weeks 3, 4, 5, 6, and even beyond. So by setting goals in the middle, the Goldilocks zone, you're able to make that growth. And so when we think about long-term growth and setting goals, what comes to mind is what we like to call SMART goals. You may have heard of SMART goals. They've been around for a while. But just to remind you how a SMART goal doesn't necessarily have to be a life goal. It could also be about what are you going to get done today? In this hour, you have maybe an hour or two after the kids go to bed on a Tuesday night. What specifically can you get done tonight? Yes, I know the paper has to get done eventually, but thinking about the paper is like saying I need to run a marathon. You can't get there tonight. So what can you specifically get done tonight? Is it measurable? What does done look like for you today? If you keep the goal as, I want to work on my paper, working on your paper could mean opening the laptop, writing 2 sentences, putting it down and saying, I worked on my paper. But if you give yourself a measurable goal, that allows you to, back to Dale Carnegie's quote, you can see the action you've been taking, which will actually give you that confidence and courage. And can you write that goal or think of that goal in a way that shows that you're taking action? What's the action you will be taking? Is it finding 5 sources or 4 sources for your flip-flop essay for LAN 101? Is it to submit the first draft to your professor for a proofread? Is it to make an appointment with the writing center for next week? What action are you taking today? Is it realistic? Is it relevant to where you are in life? It may be unrealistic to think that you can have 5 uninterrupted hours with the life that you currently have, with the family or job or ministry that you have. So can you write it in a way that is relevant and realistic with where you are in life? And lastly, is this goal your time, or is this dependent on the professor's deadline? The more you can unhook yourself from someone else's deadline and make it relevant to where you are in life, obviously getting it done before the deadline, the ultimate deadline, but giving yourself small, smart deadlines earlier in the week, earlier in the day, to give yourself those small wins that can help build momentum toward the ultimate win. And so taking a step back from academic projects and just looking at life in general, is there an area of life that you could benefit from maybe less grand goals and more small, consistent, daily consistent habit goals, rather than this grand story of intensity? Because when we think about managing projects or managing our life or managing our academic career, we really need to take into account the big picture, right? Yes, there's the external, there's the challenges, there are the deadlines that are coming, but there's also this internal belief. Being able to match your time and tasks so that you have a clear plan with the time you have that day allows you to take action without necessarily feeling like your whole identity is on display. And be able to do that in small, measurable steps. And that's really the key. To do this academic career isn't to do it in small, meaningful, measurable steps. Because ultimately the goal of graduation is worth it, right? You've started this because you have a goal to complete something. But yet that large goal has to be accomplished through a series of smaller wins, each class at a time, each assignment at a time, to be able to see the big picture, yet break it down into its small steps. And so that's what we're all about at the Ally Center. If you want to have help talking through either how to manage the external, the priorities, the deadlines, or if you want to talk about the internal of how you can gain skills and how you can gain belief and see yourself as a scholar, the Ally Center would be more than happy to have a conversation about this. You can reach out to us at our website, lbc.edu/ally, or you can schedule online at tutor.lbc.edu.